when girls see a female role model coaching them, that they are likely to stay in sports longer.
You're listening to Nonprofits Today, the podcast that showcases the incredible impact nonprofits have in our ever-changing world. The podcast that gets the pulse on today's economic, social, political, and humanitarian climate straight from frontline leaders, innovative changemakers, and courageous risk-takers in our communities and around the globe. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Sarah Box.
Welcome, I'm Sarah Box, your host, and today I'm joined by Pam Baker, a visionary who has moved from a prolific career in healthcare to founding the Women's Coaching Alliance. Pam's journey is not just about leadership, but also about transforming her personal grief into a powerful impact, aiming to increase the number of women coaching youth sports. And there's a reason that was a focus for her, but it has grown beyond that nascent state to what it is becoming today, which is really exciting. So now, with that very brief introduction, let's formally welcome Pam to the podcast and dive into how she's making strides in changing the landscape of youth sports and leadership. Hi, Pam.
So good to see you, Sarah. Thanks for having me and for a great introduction.
Well, thank you very much. You had a transition from healthcare to founding the Women's Coaching Alliance. It was not a smooth or even not necessarily even a transition that you saw coming.
Not at all.
So can you share what the heck happened?
Yeah. 25 years in healthcare, big companies, small companies, digital health, consulting. I had a stop in between where I was working on an organization that was helping young adults figure out their career paths instead of, everyone thinking they step on a treadmill of a career, helping them broaden that thinking about what could they possibly do with their interests and values and skills and how to apply those to a different industry when you find yourself in a place that doesn't feel quite like the right one. And that was a lot of in-person work that we were doing. And then COVID hit, and we were in the process of moving our format to a more digital approach. And in May of that year, my husband got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and it was late stage. And so it was rapid deterioration. And so he passed away about 3 months after that. My mom died 3 weeks before he did. My then 12-year-old daughters were home from school because of COVID. So life looked very different kind of that next day. And so I, as we often do, you go back to the thing that you know. And so I went back to work and kind of kept at it and had one of those moments one morning where I thought, I need to just take a step back. And so I stepped away from my work just to sort of reevaluate. And in the process, there was this real interest in doing something to keep the memory of Doug alive. I'm certainly biased, but he was somebody who was just a special human being. I often say he's pretty sparkly. And he was somebody who was an athlete, and he was a product of great coaches. He would come home with these random coach sayings that, like, half the time I honestly didn't even know what he meant. But he just was so inspired by great coaches. And on our second date, I asked him, what would you do if you could do anything with your career? And instantly it was, I would coach. And so he found some kind of subtle ways to do it at work. And then when our girls got old enough to play sports, he was the first one to raise his hand to go out and coach them. But because he was coaching girls, especially as they got a little bit older, he realized he would benefit from having a woman coaching with him, because these little girls are strange human beings when you're used to just being surrounded by boys. And he struggled. Every season, he would have a hard time getting women into coaching. And he would often say, where are all the women coaches? And so I worked with our local Parks and Rec Foundation to set up a fund that was focused on giving every kid the chance to play sport and getting a great coach in the process, knowing that women had an important piece of that, but honestly not knowing anything more than that. So that's what we did. I stepped away from it and said, I have no idea what we're going to do with it, but we'll do something. And that initial idea or kind of fund became what is now the Women's Coaching Alliance.
So what was the answer, at least initially, to why there weren't more women coaching in sports, specifically youth sports?
So that one was so interesting to me because there was such a strong parallel to what I had seen in the corporate world, where there's some data about, men need to feel about 50% qualified to step up for the role, and women need to be, 98.5% qualified before we'll even apply and raise our hands. And the reasons that I would hear from women when I would ask them about coaching, these were incredibly accomplished and talented athletes, but it was usually some version of, well, but I didn't play all the way through college, or I was only at a D2 school. It was this constant experience of sort of less thanning ourselves. And of course, I would look at the men who were coaching, a lot of them, great coaches, but they hadn't played sport. They certainly, weren't playing it all the way through college themselves. And it was this very similar experience of women tending to feel as though, I have to either have a degree in it or be, have some measure of what everybody would agree is 110% accomplished to do this thing before I can even step in and raise my hand to be qualified. And so that to me was something I had seen throughout my experience in the corporate world, and to see it showing up on the coaching front as well said to me that this was something that was fairly universal for so many women. And it was something that I really felt like I wanted to do something about.
So that's so interesting to me with the corporate thing, because I've seen that. You'll see where people say, well, who wants to take this on? You'll see a lot of folks, and if it's a mixed group, you'll see women put their hands up, but there's also that checking out the room a little bit like, am I the only woman doing this?
Exactly. And usually it sort of inches up bit by bit instead of shooting up. So yeah.
Not the pick me moment.
Right.
But you do have data on how sports for women who decide to go into corporate and business, how participating in team sports affects them in their career, right?
Yeah.
Can you
absolutely
share that?
Yeah. So Ernst & Young and ESPNW published about 10 years ago some data they looked at women in the C-suite, and they asked what percentage of them had played sports. And I think it was 94% of C-suite women had played sports, which absolutely makes sense. Over the course of my career, I hired former athletes, and they show up differently. They show up as they're resilient. They have learned to set goals and work towards achieving them. They're experienced in working with individuals who think and maybe act differently than they do. They're used to navigating conflict. So all of the kinds of experiences that are incredibly valuable in a business setting, these athletes have learned in spades through their experience in playing sports.
But it sounds like they weren't initially making the connection between sports and their ability, so they can go to work in the C-suite. But, oh, those young women, I don't want to negatively affect them, right? Or I'm not sure I can coach.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and so our hypothesis, fast forwarding a bit, is that we are bringing in young women who have played a sport. And so they have all of those leadership skills that they've developed through playing. Now we put them into a coaching role, and they get a whole other additive set of leadership skills through coaching. So we're early on, we're 2.5 years in, but as these young women head out into jobs and careers and into the world, I often say, I cannot wait to see what they will do next, because they are entering the world with such a formidable set of skills that I truly believe will serve them incredibly well. And when they lead, we all win.
So I'm going to ask you to draw the picture, a mental picture, a verbal picture of how relationships work in Women's Coaching Alliance, because it's multi-layered and the learning goes both ways.
It does. Yeah. So we bring in young women who have played a sport. They're between the ages of 15 to 26. And we connect her with another young woman. So she's coaching in a team of two. And that was feedback we got from some young women as we did our early research. They said, I'd want to have a partner. So they coach in teams of two. Then we bring them together in what we call our leadership academy, which is where we train our coaches to be ready to coach for the season. They get a little bit of kind of classroom training where they learn to find their voice, because making sure that you can be heard and are sounding authoritative is particularly important as a coach. It's learning how to address parents and make sure that they are feeling safe leaving their charges with these young women, how to create a culture that kids want to come back to. And then we get them out on the field or the court actually running a mock practice so they have some experience under their belts. And it's pretty interesting when we bring these young women together at this leadership academy, because we have people who will come in and don't know too much about what we do. And they look at us and they say, what's going on? And we say, oh, we're training coaches. And they look at us, and the room is like 95% women. And they say, this is a coach training? It looks so different than your typical coaches training. And it's what's fascinating, and there's some data on this from the Tucker Center, is that the way these young women show up and the questions that they're willing to ask is different when they're in a room full of women, as opposed to what typically happens in a coach training, which is generally 80% men. And I don't say that to knock the men. They're not trying to do that, but it does. There is feedback that women show up differently and they're able to ask the more vulnerable questions when they're surrounded by other women. And then the season begins. They get paired with two mentors who guide them throughout the season. One who is a coach mentor, so they've coached the sport in the past, and the other is a leader mentor. And their role is to help these young women identify the leadership skills that they are learning through coaching. So sometimes it's, oh, I had to change the practice location at the last minute because the gym was taken. And they'll say, well, yeah, I just had to change the location. And the leader mentor can say, yes, and you demonstrated resilience and you demonstrated creativity and adaptability because you didn't have all of the equipment that you were planning to have. And so you had to figure out how to run a practice differently. So all of those pieces, the mentors are at the practices and games. They're meeting with the coaches weekly. And then we pay them, which we do in an effort to both mitigate the barriers to entry. Otherwise, they would be getting other part-time jobs, but also in an effort to shrink the gender wage gap and open this conversation about value and money and worth and standing up for it. And then at the end of the season, we bring them back together where they get a chance to reflect on, what did I learn about myself? What's a mistake that I made that I would do differently the next time? Where did I develop my confidence? What's something I'm proud of? All in an effort to give them some of those talk tracks of what do you say when you're interviewing for college or a job or what have you. They begin to internalize some of those messages.
You're saving hours, countless hours of therapy. Truly. So, but then what feedback do you get from the young kids who are being coached by these women?
That is super fun. So we get feedback from the parents often of the experience their kids have had. And we get some quantitative feedback from parents, from the coaches, from our sports organization partners. But we also sometimes get to see these kids with their coaches in action. Sometimes it happens in town. We'll see them running into each other. You'll see it a little bit on the sidelines. And it is a little bit of this rock star effect because, of course, these young women are closer in age to their players. And whether it's boys or girls that they're coaching, they're just more relatable than, I'll say old people like me are to these young kids. And we had this great anecdote of this. We had a couple of our coaches coaching flag football earlier this winter, and they were coaching boys, and the coaches always send out an email to the parents letting them know who they are, that they've played the sport, that they've been trained. And this little boy at the first practice came over and he said to his mom, shh, a girl coach. And so she took him to task and said, look, they have been trained. And so he got out on the field, and about 45 minutes later, he came over for a water break, and he said, hey, Mom, I only have a minute because the coaches said we had to be quick, but it's okay because they're really good coaches. And I thought, just the ability to shift that little boy's thinking of, just because she's a girl doesn't mean she's not qualified, to like, yeah, she's just as qualified as any other coach. Like, when we can do that at mass scale, I can't even imagine what the implications will be.
Well, and the fact that the mom already had information about the training, right? You prepared or equipped the parents like, hey, this is who's going to be with your kid.
Yeah, exactly.
You can trust
and they are
us.
Qualified. Yeah.
But how great is that when someone challenges you, even if it's like your kid's not meaning to challenge you, right?
No.
But to have a response to say, hey, basically, they're great, they're trained, they're ready. Go out and do your thing. Go and be a player. So, I mean, you kind of sandwiched it in to make everybody successful. The kids are successful, the coaches are successful, the parents can advocate for sport in their own child. And that's amazing.
And the truth is, most coaches aren't trained. I think it's 3/4 of youth coaches don't go through any kind of training. So yes, our coaches are younger, but they're more qualified in a lot of cases than some of their coach peers. So
I think about that from the folks I know who coach like baseball, softball, and all that. And their gripes are mostly about coaches who've either never played or never coached. And that's really what they say is like, do they even know the rules?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these are people who've coached a long time. And I just think, well, maybe someone needs to teach them.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things I'm really excited about, again, we coach both boys and girls, but there is anecdotal data that when girls see a female role model coaching them, that they are likely to stay in sports longer. And so that's one of the things that we'll be looking at is, can we keep girls playing past that middle school drop off when so many leave sport? And I'm hopeful that we can, not only because these young women are creating a different experience, but because they see a pathway for themselves staying in sport and eventually into coaching.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said about looking up to someone who's just a few years older than you, but going, I could do that, right? Because I remember being in high school thinking, man, if I ever make it to 40, I might be dead. Because you like the concept just isn't there, right? And now looking back at 40, I'm thinking, exactly. That came really quick. I love that.
Yeah, we had a great anecdote when our coaches apply. We asked them about a coach who inspired them. And again, we've only been at this for 2.5 years. But we had the first time, this was just a couple months ago, where one of the young women who had been coached in middle school, she's now old enough to coach with us. And the person that she mentioned who inspired her was her WCA coach. And I thought, okay, now we're coming full circle. So that's pretty cool.
Talk about a badge of like championship honor, for you guys and what your vision is. Now I know nonprofits are not a smooth road to hoe. So what have you learned that surprised you, or maybe made you have to sit back a bit on your heels and readjust?
Yeah. So honestly, when I first saw all of the paperwork and process required to set up a nonprofit, my eyes glazed or turned back in my head. I'm not sure which, but so I was quite frankly intimidated by all of the process. And I am not a fundraising person by background. And yet, as really smart friends of mine have guided me, it's kind of like what we talk to our coaches about. The skills that sit underneath a lot of the fundamentals of nonprofits aren't all that different than what happens in business and other kind of parts of life. So, early on I was like, I don't know how to fundraise. I don't know. But I started my career in sales. And there are so many parallels, right? People want to support something that adds value, that aligns with what they care about. And so I think for me, it's been really shifting my thinking from I've never done that. I can't do that, to, okay, what does it take to be successful doing that thing? And either where have I done it before, or more often, who do I know who has done it before? And I think that's been just the amazing surprise for me, is we have managed to collect this amazing group of supporters, of volunteers, of people who want to get involved. And that's been a really pleasant surprise. So I'm really fortunate when many of those things come up and I'm like, I have no idea. I can reach out to people and say, what do I do? What should I know? What's important here? And people have been incredibly generous with their input and wisdom.
People want you to succeed. And I think that's the thing we forget, and this is you're saying the flip side of a conversation I have with executive directors. It's like, I don't know how to do that. I'm thinking, okay. And yet you work with families all the time and you are doing the same things, right? It's relationships, it's paying attention, it's listening.
Yeah.
You know how to do that.
Yeah.
Just don't put a label on it that makes it scary.
Yeah. Exactly.
But also the thing that really is great that you said is, I don't know how to do it, but who do I know that might?
Right.
Because you're right. If you say, hey, I don't know how to do this, can you at least point me in the right direction or tell me what I should be thinking about? I've never had someone say no, ever.
Yeah. Well, so I was chatting with this young woman who's 23 and she's in the process of trying to find a job. And so we were talking about her skills and how she's going about it. And so I said, she did this great internship. And I said, hey, have you asked her for some help in connecting you? She said, oh, not yet. And I could see the expression on her face was like, I don't want to have to ask anybody. And so I had just, when we walked into this coffee shop, and there was a group of Girl Scouts out in front who were selling Girl Scout cookies. Yeah, exactly. So I said to her, okay, let's say we walk out of here and one of those 11-year-olds asks you for help, asks you for your advice on something. What would you say? She said, oh, of course I'd help. And I was like, exactly. That's exactly what people want to do. You want to help them and others will want to help you. So just shift your thinking on it and you will just commit to yourself that you will play it forward. You will do that for the next person. And as long as you're willing to do that, then there's nothing wrong with asking, because you're going to do something for somebody else. So I think a lot of it is just like, oh, what's the struggle and how can I think about this differently?
I think it's what you said in the beginning as well, Pam. And, that whole thing, like in general, women want to be 99.8% ready for a rejection even, right? Like, okay, I got to be ready in case someone says no. It's like, it's just a no. It's just information. Maybe they can't at this moment, right? Yeah. So have a backup question. Do you know anyone else I should ask?
Yeah, exactly.
Because people go, yeah, I do, as a matter of fact. I think, your coaching was so great to use the Girl Scouts there, because I remember selling Girl Scout cookies, and I can never say no to one now.
Right? Exactly. Exactly. Doug and I used to go on bike rides together, and I always joke that we would have to go in the streets that didn't have the lemonade stands, because, man, there was a kid out there with a lemonade stand, and we were going nowhere. Of course, we were stopping. Of course, we were having the conversation with the kids, and yeah, it's just like, it's impossible.
It is. And it's so great to encourage them. Even when the lemonade is so over sugared.
Terrible.
I'm not drinking, but I walk away with it.
Exactly. So not the point.
So not the point. It's like, hey, good on you for doing this,
Exactly.
So Pam, I know that you have been asked to expand beyond your local region, right? Are you in a position where you can give us a little of that information?
Yeah, we are super fortunate to have gotten a grant from Gatorade. So we are going to be expanding to Los Angeles later this year. So we have, again, this group of 5 people who all live in LA who have said, hey, let us help. And so we've got a working team. We've got a couple of target sports organizations to partner with. We've got funding from Gatorade. So up until now, we've been in the Bay Area from San Francisco down to Palo Alto. So this will be our first sort of more distant expansion. And we've got interest from other metro areas across the country. We have more interest coming in than we can fulfill right now. So this will be a really good first test for us in terms of how we grow this and stand it up in a different geography. So, but I look at this and say, why wouldn't a community want to have more women coaching? And then I look outside the country and I say, look, in comparison, the women in this country are generally better off than they are in a lot of other places in the world. So why wouldn't we want to bring this outside our borders?
Exactly. And you're asking the age-old question of how do we scale and how do we build our capacity to do so?
Yeah, exactly.
Without drowning the organization, right? It's that you want to keep that enthusiasm, the passion for it, but it sounds like you already have 5 champions down in Southern California ready to help.
We do, 4 of whom I've never met, which is just, I think a testament to people really do want to make a difference and seem to be pretty inspired by the work that we're doing. So that's been really fun to watch.
So this question, take a second to think about it. You don't have to answer right away. But why is it important in this moment in time that you are doing this work?
Yeah, I look at the work that we are doing as developing leaders who have the skills to show up and lead in a way that we really need, and I think we really need right now. And as I often say, this is not about stepping over the men to be the sole leaders. What I see as success, because we have incredible board members and mentors and supporters and donors who are men who are cheering us on at every step. This is about having men and women lead in equal numbers side by side and learning what each of us can from the other, because we are stronger when we do that. And we know, there's data on the value of women leading on the economics of countries that lifts people up. And so I truly believe when more women are leading, we all will be the beneficiaries of it. They will, the people right in their ecosystem, and then more broadly, all of us will be. Because again, and it goes back to one of the things that you mentioned, this ability for that 5-year-old girl to see a woman leading, that's really important for her.
It does make a difference. Because if you think back to when you were that 5-year-old girl, I would wager a guess that there were women who were doing things that you thought, well, that's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I still remember them. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah. Cool. My neighbor coached the high school soccer team, and she was unique, right? Like that was not the norm. But I remember thinking, wow, that's super cool. And I wouldn't have made her team, by the way, but like she was really good and she had amazing success. So absolutely, just the ability to see that around you is huge.
So what's your ask of folks who are listening to you today? Maybe they want to get involved and help you. Maybe they want to understand more of what you're doing. But what is your ask to help you get to where your ultimate goal is, at least as you understand your ultimate goal today, right?
Yeah.
What's your ask of all of us?
Yeah, I would say, obviously the good old follow us and reach out on social media. We love to hear people who have ideas, who want to get involved. Our biggest needs right now are for mentors who can mentor our young coaches, and obviously funding. So for folks who are game to donate, who are part of organizations whose missions align with what we're doing, we're really interested in connecting with them. So those are the biggest pieces. And the other thing I will say is I get no shortage of ideas just from talking to people. So if people hear this and they say, hey, have you thought about, we just had an advisory council meeting last night with this group of awesome advisors that we have. And we went to them with a set of ideas, and they took those ideas and in 90 minutes, they made them way better. And that happens all the time. So I would love for people to see a bit about what we're up to, reach out. I'm Pam at womenscoachingalliance.org. I'm on LinkedIn. And yeah, raise your hand. Let us know what your thoughts are, how to get to your community, and help support our growth by obviously raising your hand to mentor, supporting us. And short of that, if none of those work, I would say the biggest thing that everyone can do that's super easy and doesn't cost a dime is to encourage a young woman to coach. That is the one thing that we know in every community that we go into. I always tell people these young women will not step up to coach on their own. They need somebody to tell them that they will be a really good leader and they should do so. So we'd love it if they're coaching with us, but if they're not, that's okay too. The point is, how do we get more women coaching and leading all around us? And it does truly take all of us to give them that nudge and say, you're going to be a great leader. You should go do this and propel her on her way.
I love it. We do need those nudges in our lives. And sometimes they're subtle, sometimes not so subtle.
Yeah.
And don't worry, folks, we will have all of Pam's contact information in the show notes. But as you can tell, she's very relatable, easy to speak with. And I just, the Olympics are coming to LA. By then, they're going to have some coaching going on down there. I can just see all the fun emerging from this and across the country. So, Pam, thanks for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sarah. It was a treat.
You've been listening to Nonprofits Today with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic nonprofit coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah and the Sandbox team at sarahbox.com. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible, so be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. And be sure to tune in and power up with future episodes of Nonprofits Today.